Hi, if you were to ask me what non-console system was the best to game on in 1991, I'd say Amiga. But it doesn't mean that there was anything wrong with DOS. In fact, it had tons of really cool games released for it too. I mean, let's check the best 25 together. Conquests of the Longbow is a fantasy-themed point-and-click adventure and indirect follow-up to Conquests of Camelot. In 1193, so way earlier than mobile phones and computers were invented, in a time where most entertainment came from watching the birds sing, ladies dance and jesters making fools of themselves, Richard the Lionheart, King of England, was on his way home after the end of the Third Crusade. And as kings go, he was not the worst. First ever patient to receive a transplant from another species and survive. He was open and understanding to the troubles and needs of his servants. On his way, however, he gets jumped and abducted by the soldiers of the Austrian Duke Leopold. Now, Leopold is not a nice fellow. He doesn't wipe after using toilet, you know? And since our Leo demands a huge ransom for King's freedom, King's brother Prince John just ignores it completely and decides to use the situation to take the throne for himself. I said that Leo was not nice, right? Well, John, he's a stinker. He eats boogers, he takes advantage of the farmland animals and treats his servants as disposable resource at his leisure. And this is where the game starts, with Robin Hood, whom you'll be playing as, deciding to raise enough money to free the king and rid England of the pest that the John is. So he gathers his fellow Sherwood Forest outlaws and sets on an adventure to liberate Richard the Lionheart. Same as its predecessor, Conquests of the Longbow favors situation-based actions, puzzles and minigames over traditional inventory-based gameplay, meaning you'll spend more time talking to other characters, gathering information, making decisions in crucial moments and solving riddles, rather than juggling through hundreds of items in genre-standard bottomless pockets. What's more, many of the puzzles have more than one solution, and a combination of these all throughout your playthrough will decide which out of the 4 endings you'll get to see. Conquest of the Longbow is one of the more unique and fancier online titles and a real treat to genre aficionados. After defeating the beholder Xanatar on your first adventure, you and your merry group of adventurers is summoned by the Archmage Kelban to Waterdeep again. Apparently, odd things are happening in the forests near Waterdeep. And I'm not talking naked witches dancing around the fire weird, I'm talking people disappearing without a trace, random shallow graves appearing everywhere, and a whole manner of odd things plaguing the area around the temple Darkmoon. So Kelban asks you to help, to investigate strange and evil happenings, and you being you, so not only brave but also easily bored, agree and get instantly teleported to the forest near Darkmoon. This is where your adventure begins. Eye of the Beholder 2 The Legend of Darkmoon was eagerly awaited by fans of the first game sequel and a first-person perspective tile-based movement role-playing game set in advanced Dungeons & Dragons universe. Unlike the previous title though, this time outdoor areas are added and the amount of interaction with various objects and environment is considerably expanded upon, making for a more involving role-playing experience. The main fear, however, are the vast catacombs beneath the temple Darkmoon. Upper levels of said temple and its 3 towers, Silver, Azure and Crimson. You'll be crawling through them, defeating all manner of monsters and enemies, all to find and finally defeat the High Priest Dran Dragor. And he's not really what he initially appears to be, but I suppose that his surname gives it away, doesn't it? Anyway, he's amassing an army of skeletal warriors to attack and take over Waterdeep. And your small band of merry warriors is our first and last stand. Another World is a near-perfect game. It's a cinematic arcade adventure platformer with incredible atmosphere and fantastic sci-fi setting. Let the best testament to that be the fact that the outstanding introduction explaining the origin of the story and setting up the plot to follow seamlessly transforms into gameplay. And if you're not careful and the first time Another World player, you may actually die when starting up, as you'd never know that the animation ended and that you're in fact in control already. There is just no better way to immerse the player than to completely remove the usually noticeable border between the cinematic and gameplay, especially when said gameplay is so perfectly crafted. The adventure that you'll depart on this incredibly smooth and fluid moving action platformer feels like an animated movie that you're a part of. A dark, dystopian, sci-fi movie perhaps, but one nonetheless. Another World is not just its presentation though, and even though the graphics are excellent for the time it released in, it is first and foremost a fantastic story that has the beginning, middle and end. and its plot will leave you feeling as if you took an active part in it and influenced its outcome with your actions and choices. And I say that knowing very well that it is as linear as any other platformer, perhaps even more so, taking you from point A to point B and letting you experience everything it has to offer on the way. That entirely imaginary but perfectly crafted feeling of freedom aside, the game's extremely difficult, with literally any damage to your character nearly always ending up being a fatal one. Normally, I despise games for cheap deaths and allowing those deaths to be incredibly easy to fall a victim to, but I don't get that feeling with Another World. It builds its virtual world with such an attention to detail, such sophistication, and enveloped it all in captivating and frankly speaking honestly unnecessary for a platformer story that I just can't help myself but love it. Despite the difficulty, despite the deaths, despite everything. Another World is not a game, it's an experience, an absolute gaming classic and easily the best DOS platformer of 1991. Story-wise, since I've failed to mention it so far, you're a young physicist Lester and during particle experiment you're mysteriously transported into an alien world. All because of the lightning struck nearby and your machinery's malfunction. And now, against all odds, you must find your way home. Scorched Earth is a versus tank game, similar in concept but much more advanced than 1982's classic Artillery. For starters, up to 10 tanks can take part in any single battle, and they can be any mixture of players and CPU-controlled opponents. Then there's the physics engine, that is on another level when compared to earlier mentioned oldie. It considers terrain that the battle set on, weather conditions and gravity, and does it more accurately than ever before. Most weapons can also destroy the terrain from above or below, changing its shape along with progress of the battle. And since we're on the subject, there's a lot of these guns. Rockets, zappers, rollers and other thingy-magics to choose from, and spread destruction on your naturally inferior to you opponents. Easily over 30 different ones. And they don't only differ in power and creative naming, but also in a way that they work. Some destroy everything in a radius, others drill in ground and attack from below, there's few that spread their damage over a large area, also those that roll on the surface and seek enemy tanks, and even dirt bombs covering enemy tanks in dirt, limiting their offensive capabilities. There's a lot to play around with is what I'm saying. Scorched Earth also features parachutes, reducing fall damage, and various shields that have their own properties and working mechanics. Some provide a larger defensive boost, others repel the shots or even bounce them off their surface, and it's fun to pick and match them with weapons before each battle. Scorched Earth was probably the most playable multiplayer game of 1991. It offers universal, chaotic and maddening multiplayer fun that transcends time and can be appreciated even today. Ultima Worlds of Adventure 2 Martian Dreams is a very original role-playing adventure with an emphasis leaning more on the adventure elements rather than the RPG. It's built on top of the Ultima 6's engine and works roughly the same way original did, with some small tweaks and changes adjusted for its plot reasons. It focuses more on a story than on combat too, serving a captivating tale and deep dialogues. So, conversations with other characters are much longer, more detailed and satisfying, and all that at the price of far fewer dangerous encounters. Story-wise, the game is Jules Verne's inspired Victorian tale of epic sci-fi adventure proportions. The interstellar rocket packed with 19th century scientific celebrities, for the lack of a better description, is accidentally launched towards Mars. So, the great minds of the time were all sent off the planet, whether they wanted to or not. And you're part of the rescue team sent after. Along your adventure, you'll meet many of the famous at the time scientists and people of culture. And this is precisely where you may appreciate the most how much care and attention went into creating the game, as while talking to them you'll realize how thorough was the research that went into putting this gem of a game together. While both Ultima World games were underappreciated at the time of their releases compared to other RPGs, they are no doubt special and titles worth revisiting even today. Space Quest 4 Roger Wilco and the Time Reapers is the first Space Quest title to use 256 color graphics and point-and-click interface rather than the clunky and despised by yours truly text parser. And I have to say that it actually looks really nice, utilizing the palette to its fullest extent. Presentation upgrade, same as everything else in life, did not come free, as the bump in quality required bare minimum of 286 CPU, and realistically, for a comfortable play, at least 386 was recommended. Which may sound funny today, cause your average pregnancy test's inner chip could run circles around it, but back then, wow, these were some potential expenses not everyone had the money for. The story of Space Quest 4 is quite bizarre. Well, not as bizarre as screenplays for most episodes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but weird nonetheless. The bar that Roger Wilco, the protagonist, is relaxing in is raided by heavily armed soldiers who aim to kill him, and he has no clue why. He is saved by a stranger, however, a mysterious figure that helps him escape through a time rip straight into the far-off future. How cool is that? First thing I'd do when jumping into the future and knowing that I could have come back to my own time later on would be writing down of all the winning lottery numbers and stock and crypto prices upon date of my arrival. Now, paradox here is that coming back I might not land where I started from, but in a parallel and separate earlier non-existent past, as my real former past would now be a present, but one without myself in it. Oh my god, I'm confusing myself way too much here. I better get back to our game. So, you're Roger Wilco and you're in the fictional world of Space Quest 12, a fourfold breaking dystopian future where the world befell in ruin without our hero to lean on. And this is where your real quest starts. You have to avoid yet unknown antagonist's henchmen, fulfill your heroic destiny and save the future. As in most Terra's games, you can die in many points of your adventure, and it's a mechanic that adds very little to the enjoyment of gameplay other than the annoyance and need for save scamming that is. And I hate it with a passion comparable to typical food fetish lover. So with all my heart, at all times, and in all games. That's why I always leaned more towards LucasArts games rather than Sierra's. Elvira 2 The Jaws of Cerberus is a better of the two first-person perspective Elvira games. Not that the other one was bad, this one's just better. And yet again, you lean a horror role-playing / adventure mashup like no other. This time playing as Elvira's boyfriend who has to save her. She's been captured by the three-headed demon Cerberus that wants to use her powers for his own gains. If you think about it though, how big could her powers realistically be if she was being captured left and right between both games and could never get out on her own accord? Unless her power was the ability to spawn instant arousals in her male counterparts. Then yeah, I see it as being very plausible. And pleasurable. Anyway, this time you're not in a castle anymore, because of drafts, general dampness and bone-freezing coldness of these. Instead, you're working your way through a horror movie studio in which all the props and movie sets somehow turned into real monsters. All because of the studio being built on an ancient haunted grounds. And same as the last time, you move around grid-based maps, experiencing them from your eye's perspective. The most unique feature of Elvira 2 is its very innovative magic system, which often calls for the use of specific items to cast spells, so glass or wooden objects or a liquid to name a few. And these can be quite literally any items picked up throughout the game, as long as they fit the criteria. So, a glass object can be a beaker, mirror or a magnifying glass for instance. Which means that having wide range of objects or memorizing their locations within the game world is a must in this one. If you like unusual RPG adventure mixtures, especially those that touch on the horror and macabre, there was hardly any better game in 1991. Despite there being quite a few incredible adventure games to drop in 1991, Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge is easily my most favorite point-and-clicker of the year. While arguably it's not as influential as the first game was, it's still nearly as good and one of the very best adventure games ever released. Period. Once again, you're Guybrush Threepwood. And he's finally a pirate. Yay! Well, there's that at least. Perhaps a pirate that other pirates laugh at, often right in his face, making jokes and snarky remarks, but a pirate nonetheless. And this time, you're on a quest to find the Big Whoop, which as everyone knows is bigger than the Whoop and the Small Whoop. Both very important whoops, but not as. It's a legendary treasure that's said to be bigger, better and treasurier than all the riches of the richest. Yep, one of these is not a word, but who cares. Anyway, I'm sure that the title gave it away, but once again you'll face the evil LeChuck. This time he's zombified and brought back to life as an undead by his subordinates. So not alive really, but definitely kicking. Equally as mean, constipated and deadly as he's always been. Not necessarily in that order. Many things have been improved since the last game though, from graphics that have a bit more animated movie look to them, featuring beautiful hand-painted backgrounds and more detailed character sprites, LucasArts' new iMuse system synchronizing music to the on-screen action, all the way to the modernization of the interface and more cinematic feel to the adventure. The traditional for the series swashbuckling comedy atmosphere is still omnipresent and will keep you laughing from start to finish. Sometimes at the on-screen action, sometimes at yourself, but never at Guybrush. He is a pirate now after all. So, if you're hoping to eat some cup noodles while playing, I seriously discourage you from doing so, as you'll end up with noodles hanging from your nose, going up and down it while you're chuckling at funny jabs in the dialogues or unexpected interactions between the characters. Monkey Island 2, same as its predecessor, is not just a game. It's an experience that all gamers, regardless of what their favorite genres are, should dive into at least once. Commander Keen 4: The Secret of the Oracle is the 4th game in the entire Keen series and first in the Goodbye Galaxy sub-series duology. The galaxy is once again in danger. Evil alien race known as Shikadi are threatening the future of the universe. They just gotta be dealt with, and pronto. So you, naturally playing as the titular Commander Keen, decide to make sure that the evil won't triumph. You set off to consult the Oracle to learn more about the incoming danger, but as you arrive on the location though, it appears that the council members necessary for the Oracle's activation have been kidnapped by the aliens and imprisoned in the so-called Shadowlands. Having no other choice really in the situation that transpired, you head off to save them. Now, I don't know how much of a platformer is in need of a story. Wait, in fact I do, and it's not at all. But this one has it, and it's not that bad. Cliché perhaps, but not bad. The game is composed out of 2 sections, first being an overworld map from which you can choose which level to enter, keeping in mind that some of them may require fulfilling extra requirements to do so, like getting a wetsuit for instance if they located on islands. The second are the levels, which are considered completed when you find an exit in them and go through it. It's easier said than done though, as the stages are chock full of various cute looking but aggressive creatures. Anthropomorphic mushrooms, mosquitoes, slugs and the likes. And if that wasn't enough, the environmental hazards are no alien to them either, so you gotta avoid all of these too. Naturally, as it was custom in most platformers of the time, contact with any of the enemies or traps ends with an instant loss of life. As dire and terrible it may seem, I'd like to remind you of 2 most crucial things here. First of all, it's Billy Blaze, so Commander Keen, and he's no stranger to dangers and enemies. He had like what, at least 3 whole games worth of experience dealing with them prior, so he's not gonna die that easy. And secondly, and more importantly, you're in control of him, and you've saved the universe more times than I had a stake. And I love stakes. So yeah, despite all that had happened, the situation is not as terrible as it initially appeared to be, especially that you're armed with a ray gun that can be used to stun most of the enemies. And while that stun lasts for just a little while, it's more than enough in most cases. Keen also has his trademark pogo stick that he uses to propel himself higher than he could have jumped otherwise, and has to collect gems along the way to use them as keys for the doors that he'll encounter. I graduated to PC from the Amiga, so games like Commander Keen never really seemed that great to me, having experienced the best of the computer platforming that the 80s and 90s could offer, but its importance for the platform at the time cannot be overstated. Commander Keen 4 is a fundamental game and one of the best DOS platformers of its time. Martian Memorandum is a sequel to year prior's Mean Streets and a detective-themed point-and-click adventure set in futuristic San Francisco. Between the events of the earlier title and now, Tex Murphy that you play as is down on his luck, broke and desperately needing a new case to work on, a theme that follows him from many of his computerized adventures. Fortunately, he's soon to receive an interesting one. A typical on the first glance case of a kidnapping of a wealthy mogul's daughter that's soon to develop into something much more. As you'll work on it, giving it your alcoholic best, so precisely 40%, you'll discover what really lies beneath this seemingly very innocent case. And the fate of the future of Earth will once more fall onto your broken shoulders and silk around a mysterious object that you're asked to recover. The graphics in Martian Memorandum, identically to its predecessor Mean Streets, is a neat mixture of drawn and digitized assets. The sounds and music are appropriate, as in team-fitting and not PG-13, yet nothing to write home about. But most importantly, the acting, quite fortunately I might add, is as campy and cringe as it's always been, to the point of it being so bad that it actually, ironically, becomes really good. And it's a definite highlight of the game. Don't let it fool you though, cause despite the acting, Martian Memorandum's overall story is well written and interesting. What is annoying about it though, and yeah, there are 2 things, is the pixel hunting for clues, and even more so, that you can get irreversibly stuck if one of the characters that was supposed to reveal a clue gets upset with you if you mistreated them or spoke to them in a way that they did not appreciate. And while it can be argued that it's a realistic approach having a game stop because someone just doesn't like you, it's not a good game design idea. Might and Magic 3 Isles of Terra is the best and most modern in its design and presentation out of all legendary Might and Magic games, so the first 3. It's also a first-person party-based role-playing, utilizing popular at the time tile-based movement and turn-based combat. It's the first title in the series to support mouse control, which generally speaking may have not been a novelty in 1991, but for this series in particular, it most definitely was something that made lives of players much easier and interface more ergonomic. It features an auto-mapping system and maps larger than previously available, exceeding original limit of 16 by 16 squares. Easily the biggest new feature of Might and Magic, however, was the ability to save the game virtually anywhere. Well, short of one location in the entire game, but that was for plot reasons. That seemingly insignificant change completely removed the requirement for players to constantly keep locations of ins in mind, as previously saves could only be made in them. I realized that I said nothing about the story yet, and while it's heavily rooted in the previous two titles, I'll try to do my best. A corrupted evil guardian of Terra, Sheltem, is in an epic and never-ending battle with another guardian, Korak. To defeat him, however, Korak entrusts a group of our heroes with a mission to help him get rid of Sheltem once and for all. So, you will embark on an adventure and a half, pursuing the fighting guardians and dealing with all manner of evil along the way. Given that Might and Magic 3 is still considered as one of the best RPGs of all time, I suppose it's best not to spoil the ending, and you should learn the rest of the story and its ending all by yourself. I played Sid Meier's Civilization first on the Amiga, and it was a love at first fail, and at second, and at third, and at fourth, and I think you get the gist. I loved it so much through all those failures that eventually I started to win. It was a title so different to anything I played before, my young, not yet fully formed mind had issues grasping why I liked it at all. There were no explosions in it, no fast-paced action, no turn-based squad combat, quests, missions, dames to save, dragons to slay, or even skills, attributes and level ups. You know, stuff I claim to love in my games today. And yet, I couldn't stop leading my chosen nations to glory, time after time climbing the ranks ladder. I couldn't stop trying to overtake anyone else in research or crush them with my mighty army of mostly tribal warriors and one or two tanks. Not to mention playing numerous games on the real Earth map, trying to become the true and only ruler of the world. Among all that fun, I learned some important lessons too. To balance my city's needs and requirements, making sure that the citizens were fed and productive, to best utilize the resources and terrain available to me and spread the cities in my nation in a way that would allow them to grow steadily while exploiting the resources available to them. To never skimp on education, as it's a cornerstone of progress, which in itself is base for innovation that leads to technology, which ends up being better and stronger units. Simple as that. Well, not simple at all, but here it is. To over-prepare for the war, even if there's none on the horizon, and never, ever leave my cities without a military unit in them for protection. Oh, and the throne room / palace building bonus game was a nice addition too, a visual cue of how well I was doing. All of the Civ's underlying systems, its deep intertwined mechanics and enjoyable addictive gameplay loop made me a true fan and one that did not skip a single game in the series and always buys them on a release date with all the add-ons that they get. And it was Civilization that gave me the dreadful one more turn syndrome that I cannot shake to this day, and it was years before the term was even coined. And while this first is definitely not the best game in this video, it may very well be the most important of them all, and one of the most fundamental titles to release in the entire history of gaming. Distinctive Softwares for this sports boxing is a true gem. Somewhat hidden though, as I hardly ever hear people talk about it. This, however, may be an issue on my side, cause when you talk to the mirror, you don't usually expect it to reply, and even more so, say something genuinely new. You expect it to drink as much as you do and not a sip less. Or more, for that matter either. Which would be a way funnier joke if I was a heavy drinker. Which I'm not, but you didn't know that, so perhaps I am, and I drink all the time, always, every day, whenever I can. Yep, that's precisely the case here. Anyway, bad jokes and terrible confessions aside, 4D Sports Boxing is actually a 3D boxing game that, despite badly aged simple polygonal boxy graphics, is surprisingly deep and fun. It offers an interesting career mode in which you can lead your fighter through a series of fights and improve his stats between them, all to finally become the champion, Rocky Balboa style. Well, not the Rocky that kept losing, but the Rocky that was winning. What makes 4D Sports Boxing stand out between other boxing games though is how naturally the boxers move, how heavy the hits feel for the lack of a better word, and how unexpectedly spot on the collision detection is, which was not a given at all in a 3D game in the early 90s. Even if it's not the best boxing game on PC overall, by 1991, with its jabs, uppercuts and hooks, 4D Boxing was easily the best game in its own sport. Upon its release, Falcon 3.0 was easily the most realistic and complex flight combat simulation on the market. and the benchmark for all the future games in the genre. The realism, however, wasn't cheap at all, and playing with high-fidelity flight model enabled required a very beefy 486 CPU, which may not seem like anything special today when we're talking about it over 30 years later, but when you realize that it was 1991 when the game dropped and many people were still happily playing on their 386s, your point of view may change. Anyway, Falcon 3.0 offered numerous different missions and a campaign to complete, and went a step ahead when compared to other games of the time, allowing you to manage your whole squadron and not just your craft when playing alone. Interestingly enough, if you linked two PCs, then two of you could participate in the same missions together, and you did not even have to use the same craft. So one of you could be flying in a fast and nimble fighter, taking care of the enemy crafts, while the other would carry bombs to the mission target site, for instance. Impressive, right? And what if I told you that up to 16 people could play like that all at once? Now, that's something that was completely unseen in 1991. Most regular viewers of this channel know that while I've played a lot of games, I'm not really a simulation aficionado and don't claim to be very knowledgeable in the subject. I remember having fun playing Falcon 3 for a minute, but I seriously doubt that I ever completed more than just a few missions. More than likely moving to some other game in a different genre soon after. That's me though, and Falcon 3's importance and quality is unquestionable despite that. Fans of simulations would no doubt enjoy it even today. So if you are one and looking for something fun to play from the year, there's hardly anything better. While generally speaking, being an arcade puzzler, Volfied has a story. Your home planet, the titular Volfied, has been invaded by the evil aliens and is currently being overrun and exploited by them. What a dick move. I mean, you just barely got back from saving the world in Commander Keen, and you're sent on a new and dangerous mission straight after, but it is what it is. Originally Volfied, as an arcade title, was a successor to Quicks, adding extra features, modernizing gameplay and switching to a sci-fi aesthetic. NPC's version is no different, as it's essentially an arcade-perfect port. Gameplay revolves around claiming the area of each of the levels screened while avoiding evil creatures that try to prevent it. You do so by drawing a line from the outside border through the playfield, and when you reach the other part of the border with said line, without it being broken by one of the enemies, the smaller area out of the two you divided the playfield into becomes the part of the border itself. In order to complete the level, you must claim 80% of the whole playfield area. While it may not sound like fun from my description, it's actually not only very playable, but also downright addicting. Having to gauge the risk-reward mechanic of when to attempt to grab a bigger piece of the land, so to speak, for extra points, or when to take it easier, making sure not to become an easy target for the enemies. The mechanics are very easy, but mastering Volfied is not an easy task at all, but one worth attempting anyway. Pulse of Darkness is a turn-based tactical combat RPG and a direct continuation of the story from Secret of the Silver Blades, culminating the whole Pool of Radiance four-parter of Goldbox Games. It is set 10 years after the events of Pool of Radiance, so the first game out of all, with your party of hardy and brave adventurers returning to the city of Flan, which sounds a lot like flan, a delicious dessert which is as sweet as this game is. And while everything seems calm and peaceful in the city, as soon as you leave it to escort a council member Sasha on a diplomatic assignment, the evil Lord Bane sends his terrible lieutenant monsters to destroy the cities of Faerun. In doing so, he claimed it for himself and left it in ruin. From this point onward, your mission is rather obvious, to defeat Lord Bane and restore the peace to the lands. But to do so, you'll need to face and defeat his 4 lieutenants first and acquire items that they possess. Each of them is located in other dimension, so our heroes have to reach them using interdimensional portals known as Pools of Darkness. Other than the mandatory quests, there's also tons of side ones, and I'd suggest taking your time to do them all, as the experience that you'll get for them will be more than necessary on more difficult parts of your adventure. As in other games in the series, you can either import characters from previous game or create new ones made out of standard AD&D races and classes. Pools of Darkness is great, and if you like previous ones or enjoy tactical RPGs, you'll love it. Wing Commander 2 Vengeance of the Kilrathi is the first sequel in the Chris Roberts' long-running series of sci-fi space combat simulation games. Gameplay-wise, apart from the addition of numerous new spaceships and weapons, it's largely more of the same. So if you like the first game, you'll love the second. Changes, however, are quite prominent in the story department, which, while being a direct follow-up to the first game, is now more structured, deeper and less open-ended. As a result of that, you can no longer be awarded promotions or medals. On the other hand, Wing Commander 2 is now chock full of animated cutscenes, some even using some of the industry's first voice acting, which makes it feel more like a movie that you partake in, rather than just a game. The biggest change mechanically, however, is that your wingmen cannot die other than in scripted cutscenes, and if their ships are destroyed during in-game combat, they just eject now. Your carrier Tiger Claw is destroyed few years before the game starts by the stealth Kilrathi fighters. Since you have no proof of that, you are blamed for the ship's destruction, demoted and sent off to a far-off station to spend the remainder of your career there. After years in exile from any kind of significance, you're able to save the Confederation's flagship Concordia from the Kilrathi attack and are given a chance to stop the warring alien race and prove your innocence in one sweep campaign. Well, not that sweep, but definitely pretty sweet. Supaplex is a Boulder Dash clone. You're Murphy, bug hunter living inside the computer, and your aim in each level is to collect enough infotrons to open the exit and to get to it as fast as possible. The so-called infotrons are what diamonds were in Boulder Dash, so basically collectibles. No reason to look for any deeper meaning behind them, they're just what you have to grab for the exit to open. Same as in Boulder Dash, in Supaplex there are also enemies too, and zonks, which are mechanically equivalents to rocks from the earlier title. I know, I too think that way too much time was spent on the naming. Fortunately, Supaplex is pretty good and it defends itself with gameplay. It consists of 111 levels in total, and up to 3 of these may be skipped to advance further. You know, when something's just that too difficult for your liking at any given point. Some levels have certain rules, like gravity and other modifiers, but in general, most follow same rules Boulder Dash set and perfected years earlier. Interestingly enough, Supaplex features player profiles, meaning that few of them can progress separately using the same computer and same copy of the game. Which may not seem like much today in 2024, but in 1991, on a shared home computer, it was such a quality of life feature you wouldn't believe. Degeneration is an action-adventure puzzle game that was one of the most unusual and interesting titles of its time. It is set in Singapore in cyberpunkish environment and in a not-too-distant future of 2021. Future, eh? Look at me, saying A going all Canadian on you. Anyway, in Degeneration, you're not a soldier, special forces agent, or even ex-military or PI. You're a courier, making a delivery to a top researcher Jean-Paul Derrida, who works on the top floor of French tech company Genox Lab, and one whose surname I've no doubt butchered here with my complete inability to even pretend to read French. I'm good with Jean-Paul cause of Jean-Luc Picard, but that was that easier part of it all. For you, it's a day like every day and you expect nothing special of it. You know, delivery, lunch, then maybe an hour or two with your girlfriend before you get back on the proverbial horse to deliver the remaining packages. Easy and quiet day. You are not working for Amazon after all, to be constantly behind the wheel stocking up on bottles of lemonade. On a side note, that's inhuman. And on a side note, so a double side one, some people may have no choice but to agree to such conditions and I feel for them. As per usual, I seem to have ended up off topic, so I better get back to it. Until you enter the Genoclub building though, you are oblivious to the fact that something went astray inside, and that the genetically engineered bioweapons inside are running rampant. The game is an isometric view puzzler at heart with tons of shoot-em-up action. In each of the interconnected rooms you go through, you'll need to solve a riddle, figuring out how to destroy all bioweapons and seal the air vents that they infest the rooms through. You'll also be finding various helpful items and rescuing Genlock survivors along the way. You will not, however, step from a path of a perfect career, and you will eventually get to Derrida with his package. Or you won't, cause Degeneration is kinda infamous for its difficulty. It's also one of the most innovative attempts to inject some life into a stale puzzle genre, so if you've never seen it, give it a go, you may end up enjoying it. Let's start off by making it clear that I never liked gods. I found it to be stiff controlling and not very entertaining. Especially because the main character was supposed to be a hero on a quest for immortality. I would expect a supposed hero to be more nimble, faster and the game more action-packed. Despite that, however, that's just me, and I do understand that majority of the gamers liked it. And I appreciate its historical significance too. Story-wise, 4 Guardians have invaded and took over the Citadel of Gods. The place where they hang around, drink whatever the gods drink, ambrosia perhaps, or grog, that would be funnier. And generally speaking, they spend their time in their leisure, getting lost in their infinite lives as infinite pleasures. You know, how gods do. And since they've been chased away from the comfortable nest, seemingly powerless to stop the invasion, they've offered their favor to a hero who will reclaim the Citadel for them. Now, I don't know how much such favor is worth, Is it the promise of godhood, or maybe like, I don't know, as much money as it costs to eat a pizza for a year for free, or even a small 3-bedroom house? Hard to tell. But the hero who replied to the call requested just that. Well, not the house or those pizzas, but a seat among the gods. Since they've no choice really, as there were no other volunteers, unwillingly perhaps, but they agree. And this is where the game begins. Gods is an action platformer with some light, mainly environmental puzzles. Presentation-wise, it's top-notch, showing what now famous Beatmap brothers could really do. Gods is made out of 4 levels, each ending with a boss guardian fight, defeating which is made easier with use of various available weaponry. Weapons can be either collected during gameplay or purchased at the end-level shops, and you can carry up to 3 of these at once. Objectively speaking, Gods is a nice and interesting action platformer that was very popular at the time, and the fact that I didn't love it doesn't mean that it's lacking in any way. Planet's Edge: The Point of No Return is a sci-fi space-themed RPG that looks like a mixture between later Ultima games and Star Trek, and the title that I've sadly never played or heard of before today. That said, as I read about it, watched the online footage and checked the reviews, I see that I've actually missed on a lot of fun, cause it seems like something that's definitely down my alley. A mysterious unknown alien craft appeared in our solar system and caused quite a ruckus with its arrival. We didn't expect it to show up, we didn't even know that there was anyone out there to show up, and yet it did, and there was. Crazy. When the craft is accidentally fired upon, because we're we and we shoot first and ask questions later, it responds by enveloping the Earth in a strange field that causes it to disappear. As instantaneous as a balloon pops. Funny enough, the gravitational pull of Earth is still there, keeping Moon in orbit of, I don't know, nothing, cause the planet's all gone? Hard to tell. The moon base, that seems to be the only remaining pocket of a human life, upon witnessing the occurrence, decides on building an interstellar ship and sending it to find parts necessary to build the so-called Centauri drive. That's our only hope of reversing the process and bringing the planet back. While the game starts in our solar system, the universe that you'll get to travel and experience comprises of 8 sectors, over 100 star systems, with their own planetary bodies and often alien civilizations too. They're all very different from one another, and not only in terms of looks, but also technological sophistication and culture. Each of the pieces required to complete the Centauri drive, whatever that is in another sector and has to be recovered to beat the game. Planet's Edge will take you on a grandiose adventure spanning the whole universe and will see you explore a huge chunk of it, find and visit many planets, meet other civilizations, mine for resources, trade, solve puzzles, take and complete quests, and partake in combat, both in space and on the surface. It's gonna be epic. The planetary sections are usually represented by the enclosed populated areas filled with peaceful NPCs as well as the enemies. Ground combat is turn-based, while the space fights are all in real time, require a lot of maneuvering, and are more of a 1v1 dogfight top-down shooter than anything else. Unlike most games in the genre, your crew of 4 doesn't get stronger by getting experience and arbitrary levels, they become stronger by equipping better weapons and armor, either found or purchased. Planet's Edge is a vast game, serving many different polished and fun mechanics, and a title that I am surprised of not having to even know about it in the time when I was consuming any and all RPGs that came out. If you like me and missed it, fix it. Lemmings is a puzzle game made by Psygnosis, a dev that nearly never failed with their releases in the early 90s, serving heaps of amazing games, each next better than the last. Lemmings is no exception, and it's a game in which your goal in each level is rather simple, and it's to lead a group of anthropomorphic lemmings to safety. And since between the level entry point and the exit there are usually numerous obstacles and dangers, it's your job to use limited number of the available abilities that you can assign to them in each stage to do so. Some, like an umbrella, allow your creatures to fall safely from great heights, others let you dig in horizontal or vertical walls, jump, spill liquid that fills in the gaps, and a whole manner of other abilities. The idea is to use what you're given to save as many lemmings as possible. Levels are divided into 4 groups of different difficulties: fun, tricky, taxing, and mayhem. And these groups reflect number of obstacles, kinds and number of available abilities, time limit, and minimum threshold of lemmings that need to be saved. Upon its release, Lemmings became an instant hit, constantly placing in the very best and top games list in various gaming mags and, much more importantly, in hearts of players. It quickly received ports to other 8 and 16-bit systems, and since most of them were stellar too, it gained critical acclaim and popularity on them as well. If there's only one game that you'll have time for from this entire video, go for LeChuck's Revenge. But if you have time for 2 or more, make sure to include Lemmings. It's great. Remember Airwolf? Mid-80s cringe action TV series featuring a high-tech military copter and Jean-Michel Vincent as the main hero? Now, today, I know it's trash. But back then, it was everything. Well, not back then maybe, as I didn't watch it on the original run, I was a bit too young for that actually, but few years later through syndication I did, and then it was everything. Non-stop action, explosions, stupid but easily to comprehend story, more explosions, stellar cast composed of B-listers and an alcoholic, perhaps more than one, but one we know of, high-tech, high-power sci-fi copter, even more explosions, and most of all, the most explosions ever. Like one after another, and each more fiery and boomy than the last. Gunship 2000 was just that for me. A TV dream come true on my Amiga. And yes, I know what I said, cause that's what I played it on. And while I did own a PC version too, through a questionable act of piracy no less, most of my experience with it came from the Amiga. But from what I know, it was basically the same game just running faster and smoother than on Commodore's system. In short, Gunship 2000 is microprocessed battle helicopter simulator in which you can partake in series of single missions or play a whole campaign, composed out of chains of these, each with primary and secondary objectives assigned randomly, which may seem like a small unspectacular thing, but the degree of quote-unquote unexpected was more than enough to prolong the life of the game considerably, and all that was based on an underlying tug-of-war system, meaning the better you did in earlier missions, the more offensive focused the following ones will be, and vice versa, the worse you do, the more often you'll be placed on defense. Gunship 2000 offers 7 different copters to choose from, beautiful for the time presentation and addictive gameplay. For fans of the genre that is, cause while I did play it a little, I never managed to complete the campaign. If you love combat simulations, chances are you either know of it already, or you will love it after giving it a go. Leisure Suite Larry 1 in the Land of Launch Lizards, which is just the best title ever and on so many levels no less, is a high-fidelity remake of the 1987's original. It switched its control scheme from text parser into much more modern point-and-click interface and encompassed it all in a lush and beautiful 256 colors VGA presentation. Other than that, the story remained unchanged. So, you play as Larry, a short, tacky and balding 40-year-old king of cringe who recently moved out of his mother's apartment and moved across the country to the city of lost wages, seeking sexual fulfillment. You know, as one does. So, finally ready to lose his long-overdue virginity, Larry sets off to hunt himself one of those titular launch lizards, or to be hunted by one, whichever leads him to his ultimate goal first. Many but not all of the in-game locations are available for exploration from the get-go, and because of that, Leisure Suite Larry 1 ends up being considerably less linear in this approach than most other early 90s adventure games. It's an interesting approach, as while not guiding you by hand anywhere, it allows you to experience the near entire game world, seeking clues or interesting items and uncovering game story along the way. The puzzles in this one are in grand majority inventory based, very simple, and require getting object to the ladies that seek them in hopes for a sexual exchange. Interestingly enough, a lot of what you do costs money, so you will have to keep an eye on it. If necessary, you can always visit a casino to win more of it, as you need to have some saved up and always available to be able to progress further, for transport and shopping, if nothing else. In Sierra's traditional fashion, there are quite a few moments that you can die in the game, or those that lead to a dead end, but it's nowhere near as annoying and ever-present as it was in their other titles. So, while it's advisable to save often, you don't really have to get into strict save scamming and doing so after each and every scene or longer conversation. Larry was famous for its rather amusing depiction of grown-up sexual themes and a lovable loser protagonist, whose charm and innocence guaranteed game success, even if mechanically and story-wise it wasn't any better than most other quote-unquote regular adventures were. Keeping all that in mind, even if you overlook the omnipresent adult themes, humor and obvious upgrades to the interface, Leisure Suite Larry 1 is still a rather fun game, and not only for the fans of the genre, but also for those who enjoy ridiculous and unusual ideas, as Larry is chock full of them. I bet that you didn't expect a second Commander Keen game in a single video, did you? But since they were all rather good as compared to what was available on the platform otherwise in 1991, the choice was rather simple, and that's how we've ended up with Commander Keen 5, the Armageddon Machine. Rather cool title if you ask me. Being the second game in the Goodbye Galaxy series, Commander Keen 5 picks up where the 4 left off. So, having learned in the previous game that the evil aliens Shikadi plan on destroying the galaxy, Keen lands on their mothership Omega Matic, another great name, and plans on destroying it to stop it from executing of the deadly plans. To do so, however, he needs to get to the core of the ship. It will require finding and destroying of the 4 machines protecting the main elevator first. Same as previously, the game is divided between the overworld map, in which you pick the level you wanna play in, and then said levels. Each of them is completed by either getting to the exit avoiding all the bodies and traps, or by finding and destroying the 4-mentioned machine, if it happens to be in it. There's considerably more robotic enemies this time, but the gameplay mechanics didn't change at all, so you still gotta avoid or zapstun them to progress. The pogo stick is not gone either, and will be more than required in some of the simple to figure out environmental puzzling. Even if I don't love Commander Keen games, for reasons stated when I spoke about the earlier one, I like and honestly respect and appreciate them all for what they did for the DOS and PC, proving that it not only could handle platformers, but they could also be fun, colorful, and yeah, I said it about an EGA game, and offer a decent, even if unnecessary plot. I'm sure that you will agree that 1991 was a rather cool year, and the games were pretty awesome, even if not fully utilizing VGA presentation and Sound Blaster cards. But whether you do or don't, let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't.